I want some sugar, so I'm having you tonight, Korean Mafia boss whispered to the black woman. The cold evening air wrapped around the city of Seoul as neon lights flickered to life across the streets. The towering buildings glowed like jewels under the cloudy sky, their reflections dancing across rain-soaked roads. Palumi Adebayo pulled her coat tighter as she stepped out of the glass doors of the translation company where she worked. Her long braids swayed slightly as she walked, her heels clicking softly against the pavement. It had been 3 months since she left Nigeria. 3 months since she boarded a plane with a single suitcase and a heart full of determination. Seoul had been everything she imagined, beautiful, fast, and overwhelming. But tonight felt different. The sky rumbled quietly above her as raindrops began to fall. Palumi sighed and opened her umbrella. "Just my luck," she murmured. Her phone buzzed in her hand. She glanced down at the screen. Taxi strike continues across central Seoul tonight. Expect delays. Palumi groaned softly. Seriously? She checked the map on her phone. Her apartment was still 20 minutes away by foot. Normally, she wouldn't mind the walk, but the streets were unusually quiet tonight. Most shops had already closed, and the few people passing by hurried under umbrellas, eager to escape the rain. Palumi began walking anyway. Her steps were steady and confident, though her eyes scanned the unfamiliar streets carefully. Being alone in a foreign country had taught her to stay alert. As she turned a corner, she noticed a narrow alley that cut between 2 tall buildings. Her phone map confirmed it. Shortcut. 8 minutes saved. Palumi hesitated for a moment. Then she shrugged. Why not? She stepped into the alley. The sound of rain faded slightly as the tall buildings blocked the wind. The dim streetlights flickered overhead, casting long shadows across the ground. Halfway down the alley, Palumi suddenly slowed. Something felt off. Her eyes moved ahead. Black cars. 3 of them. Parked in a neat row. Luxury cars. And beside them stood several men in dark suits. They weren't talking. They weren't moving. They just stood there, watching. Palumi's instincts immediately went on alert. Okay, definitely not normal. She stopped walking. For a moment, the alley was silent except for the soft tapping of rain. One of the men reached for his earpiece. Another turned slightly toward the darkness behind the cars. Palumi's heart thumped once in her chest. Yeah, wrong shortcut, she whispered. She slowly turned around, ready to walk back the way she came. But then, a voice spoke behind her.
Low. Calm.
Powerful. You're leaving already? Palumi froze. The voice didn't sound angry, but it carried the kind of authority that made people stop breathing. Slowly she turned. A tall figure stepped forward from the shadows between the buildings. The streetlight above flickered once. Then his face became visible. Sharp features. Dark hair slicked neatly back. A perfectly tailored black suit. But it wasn't his appearance that made Palumi's chest tighten. It was his presence. The kind that filled the entire alley. The men in suits immediately straightened when he appeared. Palumi had never seen him before. Yet somehow, she knew instantly that he was the one in charge. The stranger studied her carefully, his dark eyes calm and unreadable. You walked into my street, he said quietly. Palumi tilted her head slightly. And one of the guards shifted uncomfortably.
No one usually spoke to their boss like that.
But Palumi crossed her arms casually. I was just passing through. The man took a slow step closer. Rain dripped from the edge of his umbrella, but he didn't seem bothered by the storm. What's your name? He asked. Palumi raised an eyebrow. You always question random women in alleys? For a moment, the guards exchanged glances. This woman clearly had no idea who she was talking to. But the man's lips curved slightly. Just a little. Only the interesting ones. Palumi studied him. There was something dangerous about him. Not loud danger. Not reckless danger. The quiet kind. The kind that didn't need to prove itself. She took a breath. Palumi Adebayo. The man repeated it slowly. Palumi. His accent wrapped around the name carefully. Beautiful name. Palumi blinked, then shrugged. Thanks. The rain suddenly grew heavier. Water drummed softly against the cars. For a moment neither of them spoke. Then Pulumi slipped her phone back into her coat pocket. "Well, it was nice meeting whoever you are." She gestured toward the alley behind him. "But I still need to get home." The man didn't move. Instead, he stepped closer. Close enough that Pulumi could see the faint scar near his eyebrow. His voice dropped slightly. "You're not afraid." Pulumi held his gaze. "Should I be?" The guards held their breath. No one talked to Jang Min-seo like this. No one. A slow smile appeared on his face. Not threatening. Not amused. Just intrigued. "Maybe," he said. Pulumi smirked. "Well, you haven't given me a reason yet." For the first time that night, Jang Min-seo looked genuinely surprised. Then he chuckled softly. And the guards knew instantly. This woman had just become the most interesting person in Seoul. Because the most feared mafia boss in Korea was smiling at her. And Pulumi Adebayo had no idea that the simple shortcut she took tonight had just changed her life forever. The rain continued to fall steadily in the narrow alley, each drop tapping softly against the polished roofs of the black luxury cars. The dim streetlight above flickered again, casting shifting shadows across the ground. Pulumi Adebayo stood calmly, her umbrella tilted slightly over her shoulder as she studied the man in front of her. The stranger, who somehow seemed to control the entire space around him. Behind him, the men in dark suits remained silent and perfectly still. Their eyes moved carefully between Pulumi and their boss, clearly unsure how this situation would unfold. Pulumi noticed it immediately. They're watching him, waiting for his reaction. Which meant one thing. He's the leader. The man stepped a little closer. Not aggressively. Not hurriedly. Just one measured step that somehow shortened the distance between them enough for Pulumi to notice the faint scent of expensive cologne mixed with rain. His dark eyes moved across her face slowly, almost thoughtfully. "You shouldn't be walking alone this late," he said. Pulumi lifted one eyebrow. "You shouldn't be interrogating strangers in alleys." A faint murmur passed between the guards before they quickly straightened again. The man ignored them completely. Instead, he tilted his head slightly as if examining a puzzle. "Most people would have run by now." Pulumi shrugged. "Most people probably know who you are." That answer made him pause. For the first time, curiosity flashed across his face. "You don't." Pulumi shook her head. "Nope." She gestured lightly toward the line of expensive cars and bodyguards. "Although I can make a few guesses." The man chuckled softly under his breath. It was low and surprisingly warm. "You're bold." "I'm honest." Sometimes those two things are dangerous. Pulumi smiled faintly. Sometimes they're necessary. The rain intensified, drumming against the pavement. For a brief moment, the alley filled with nothing but the sound of falling water. Then the man took another slow step closer. Now, they were standing only a few inches apart, close enough for Pulumi to feel the quiet intensity in his gaze. The guards shifted slightly. Their boss rarely allowed anyone to stand this close, especially strangers. But he didn't step back. Instead, he leaned slightly toward her. Pulumi remained perfectly still. Then his voice dropped. Lower. Quieter. Almost like a secret meant only for her. "I want some sugar," he whispered. Pulumi blinked. Her eyebrows slowly pulled together in confusion. Before she could respond, he leaned even closer. His breath brushed softly near her ear as the rain continued to fall around them. "So," he added calmly, "I'm having you tonight." The guards froze. Completely. They had seen their boss threaten politicians, criminals, and powerful businessmen without hesitation. But this was different. Pulumi stared at him for 2 long seconds. Then, she burst out laughing. Not a nervous laugh. Not a polite laugh. A full, genuine laugh that echoed slightly through the alley. The bodyguards looked horrified. One of them even lowered his head slightly, waiting for the explosion that usually followed when someone mocked their boss. But it never came. Instead, Jang Min-seo stared at her in surprise. Pulumi wiped a tear from the corner of her eye. "Oh my God," she said between laughs. "That was the worst line I've ever heard." The alley went silent again. "You're serious?" she continued, shaking her head. "You're standing here with a whole Mafia movie setup and that's your line?" One of the guards coughed awkwardly. Another stared at the ground. Minasio's expression remained unreadable for a moment. Then something unexpected happened. He laughed. A deep, genuine laugh that even surprised his own men. It was rare. Extremely rare. Pulumi folded her arms and tilted her head. "So, are you going to introduce yourself?" she asked. "Or are you just the mysterious alley flirt?" Minasio studied her again, this time with much more interest. "You're different. I get that a lot. Most women would be terrified right now." Pulumi shrugged casually. Most women probably weren't raised by a Nigerian mother. That made him smile again. Then his expression shifted slightly. More serious. "Pulumi Adebayo," he said slowly. The moment the words left his mouth, Pulumi's smile faded. Her eyes widened slightly. How do you know my name?" The guards exchanged knowing looks. Now she was beginning to understand. Minasio slipped one hand into his coat pocket. "I told you," he said calmly. "I know interesting things." Pulumi narrowed her eyes. "You looked me up?" "Of course." "That's creepy. That's efficient." She shook her head in disbelief. "You Mafia men are unbelievable." Minaso leaned slightly against one of the cars, completely relaxed now. "You figured that out already?" Pulumi gestured around them. "Let's see, black luxury cars, silent bodyguards, mysterious leader in a tailored suit." She tilted her head. "Yeah, I think I cracked the code." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The tension in the alley had changed. It was no longer dangerous. It was electric. Minasio stepped forward again. This time slower, more deliberate. His voice softened when he spoke again. "You're not like anyone I've met in this city." Pulumi raised an eyebrow. "And you say that to all the women you corner in dark alleys?"
No.
He paused. "Only the ones brave enough to laugh at me." Pulumi studied him for a moment. Then she glanced toward the alley exit behind him. "Well, mysterious Mafia boss," she said calmly, "this has been a very strange conversation." She stepped around him carefully. "But I really do have to go home." For a second, the guards looked ready to block her path. But Minasio raised a hand slightly. They stepped aside immediately. Pulumi walked a few steps down the alley. Then she paused. She turned back slightly. "You should work on that line, though," she added. "It's terrible." Minasio smirked. "Noted." She smiled faintly and continued walking until she disappeared around the corner. The alley grew quiet again. One of the guards finally spoke. "Boss, should we follow her?" Minasio watched the empty street thoughtfully.
No.
"But—" He cut him off calmly. "She'll come back." The guard looked confused. "Why?" Minasio adjusted his watch and stepped toward his car. His lips curved slightly as he answered. "Because Pulumi Adebayo is the kind of woman who doesn't run from danger." He opened the car door. And sooner or later, his eyes glinted under the dim streetlight. She's going to realize she just met the most dangerous man in Seoul. The door closed, and the cars slowly drove away into the rainy night. But somewhere in the city, neither of them could stop thinking about the other. And their story had only just begun. Pulumi Adebayo had successfully avoided thinking about the mysterious Mafia boss for exactly 24 hours. After that, it became impossible. The memory of the alley replayed in her mind while she worked, while she walked home, even while she tried to sleep. His voice, his confidence, and that ridiculous line, "I want some sugar." Pulumi groaned softly as she rubbed her forehead at her office desk. "Why am I even thinking about this?" she muttered. Across the room, her coworker Hannah glanced over. "Thinking about what?" Pulumi straightened quickly. "Nothing." But the truth was, something about that man had unsettled her. Not in a frightening way. In a curious way. He carried power the way some people carried a coat. Effortlessly. And she couldn't shake the feeling that he already knew far more about her than she knew about him. The thought alone irritated her. Later that evening, Pulumi finally returned to her apartment building. It was a modest place, tucked between two taller complexes. The small lobby smelled faintly of fresh laundry and jasmine air freshener. She pushed open the door and stepped inside. The elderly landlord, Mr. Kim, looked up from behind his desk. "Miss Pulumi," he called. Pulumi smiled politely. "Good evening, Mr. Kim." He held up a sleek black envelope. "This came for you." Pulumi paused. "For me?" He nodded. "A man delivered it earlier." Her curiosity immediately spiked. She walked over and took the envelope. It was thick, expensive paper.
Heavy. Minimal.
No stamp. No address. Just her name written neatly across the front. Pulumi Adebayo. She already knew who it was from. Pulumi sighed. "That man works fast." Mr. Kim blinked. "You know him?" Pulumi forced a smile. "Unfortunately." She headed upstairs, the envelope still in her hand. Inside her apartment, Pulumi tossed her coat on the couch and sat at the small kitchen table. For a moment, she just stared at the envelope. Then she opened it. Inside was a single black card. 3 simple words were printed in elegant silver ink.
Dinner.
8 p.m. Below, it was a location. Rooftop, Daehan Tower. Pulumi leaned back in her chair slowly. Absolutely not. She dropped the card onto the table.
Nope.
Not happening. She stood up and walked toward the kitchen. "I am not going to dinner with a mafia boss who whispers weird things in dark alleys." She opened the fridge.
Closed it.
Then glanced back at the card. Definitely not. 2 hours later, the elevator doors opened quietly at the top of Daehan Tower. Pulumi stepped out. She wore a simple black dress and long coat, her braids falling neatly over her shoulders. The cool wind brushed against her face as she walked onto the rooftop. Seoul stretched endlessly below her, glowing with thousands of city lights. And there, near the glass railing, was Jang Minjae. He stood beside a small table set for 2. Candles flickered softly in the evening breeze. Pulumi stopped walking. "You're kidding me," she muttered. The setup was absurdly elegant. Soft lights. Fine dining. A breathtaking skyline view. Minjae turned when he heard her footsteps. He didn't look surprised at all. In fact, he looked completely relaxed. "You came." Pulumi walked closer, arms folded. "I came to say something." He pulled out the chair across from him. "Sit first." "I'm not staying long." "That's fine." After a brief hesitation, she sat down. Minjae poured 2 glasses of wine calmly. The rooftop was quiet except for the distant hum of traffic below. Pulumi watched him carefully. "You're persistent," she said. "I'm efficient. You investigated me. I research interesting things." Pulumi exhaled slowly. "Let's get something clear." He lifted his glass. "I'm listening." Pulumi leaned forward slightly. "I don't belong to anyone." Minjae paused. Then he smiled faintly. "Good." Pulumi blinked. That wasn't the reaction I expected. He took a sip of his wine. "I don't collect things that belong to others." The simple sentence made her pause. For the first time since meeting him, Pulumi noticed something deeper in his eyes. Not just power, not just danger, but control. Careful, calculated control. "Then why invite me?" she asked. Minjae set his glass down. "Curiosity. That's it. For now." Pulumi shook her head slightly. "You don't strike me as someone who wastes time." "I don't." "Then what do you actually want?" Minjae leaned back in his chair, studying her carefully. "The same thing I said yesterday." Pulumi groaned immediately. "If you say that line again." He laughed softly. "I won't." "Good." "But I meant what I said." Pulumi stared at him. "And what exactly did you mean?" His voice lowered slightly. "You interest me." Pulumi rolled her eyes. "Lots of people say that. None of them are me." That answer hung quietly between them. The wind lifted slightly across the rooftop. Pulumi looked out at the glowing city lights. Then back at him. "You know what's funny?" "What?" "I almost didn't come tonight." Minjae raised an eyebrow. "Almost." She sighed. "I told myself I shouldn't. And yet," Pulumi picked up the wine glass and took a small sip. "Here I am." Minjae smiled slightly. Exactly where I expected you to be. Palumi narrowed her eyes. You're very confident. I'm rarely wrong. She leaned back in her chair and studied him again. Tell me something.
What?
Are you always this mysterious? Only with people worth the effort. Palumi smirked. Well, congratulations. For what? You officially have my curiosity too. Minjae's eyes glinted with quiet satisfaction. Because that was exactly what he wanted. Not obedience. Not fear. Curiosity. And as the candlelight flickered between them high above Seoul's glowing skyline, neither of them realized just how dangerous their growing interest in each other would become. Their dinner had only just begun. And this night was about to change everything. The next morning, Palumi woke up feeling strangely restless. Sunlight slipped through the thin curtains of her apartment, casting soft golden lines across the floor. Normally, mornings were simple for her. Wake up, shower, grab coffee, head to work. But today, her mind refused to settle. She sat on the edge of her bed, staring at her phone. Her thoughts drifted back to the rooftop dinner. Minjae. The calm confidence in his voice. The way he watched her like he was trying to solve a puzzle. Palumi shook her head and stood up. Nope, she muttered. I'm not doing this. She walked toward the bathroom. I'm not letting some mysterious mafia boss get inside my head. Still, a small smile crept onto her face. Later that morning, Palumi stepped into her favorite cafe just a few blocks from her office. The small shop smelled like fresh coffee beans and warm pastries. Soft Korean music played in the background while customers quietly typed on laptops or chatted with friends. Palumi ordered her usual. Iced vanilla latte, please. The barista smiled and nodded. Coming right up. Palumi turned around to find a seat. Then she froze. Sitting calmly by the window was Minjae. He was dressed in a dark suit again, perfectly composed, reading a newspaper as if he had been there all morning. Palumi blinked slowly. No way. She walked over and stopped beside his table. Are you serious? Minjae looked up calmly.
Oh.
Good morning, Palumi. She placed her hands on her hips. You're following me. He folded the newspaper neatly. I'm drinking coffee. At my cafe. Is it yours? Palumi opened her mouth. Closed it. That's not the point. Minjae leaned back slightly, studying her expression. You seem surprised. I am surprised. Why? Because yesterday you were hosting candlelight dinners on skyscrapers, and today you're casually sitting in my coffee shop. Minjae shrugged. I like variety. Palumi stared at him for a moment. Then the barista called her order. Iced vanilla latte. She grabbed her drink and walked toward another table. But something made her glance back. Minjae was watching her again. Not intensely. Just quietly. Observing. Palumi shook her head. This man is unbelievable. 2 days later. Palumi stepped out of her office building after finishing work. The evening sky had turned soft shades of orange and purple as the sun dipped behind the city skyline. She checked her phone while walking toward the sidewalk. Then a familiar voice spoke behind her. You work too much. Palumi stopped walking. She turned slowly. Minjae stood leaning against a sleek black car parked beside the curb. Her jaw dropped slightly. You've got to be kidding me. He smiled faintly. You look surprised again. Palumi walked toward him. You're everywhere. He raised an eyebrow. Is that a complaint? Yes. Why? Because this feels like stalking. Minjae crossed his arms. I prefer the word, observing. Palumi groaned. You're impossible. And yet you keep talking to me.
She paused.
Then pointed a finger at him. That's because you keep showing up. Minjae straightened and stepped closer. This time, his expression grew more serious. You shouldn't walk alone at night. Palumi frowned. I've been doing it for 3 months. And nothing happened. Exactly. He shook his head slowly. Not exactly. Something about his tone made Palumi pause. What does that mean? Minjae glanced briefly up and down the street. The casual smile from earlier had faded. Now his face looked colder. More alert. Someone has been asking about you. Palumi blinked. What? His eyes returned to her. Questions. From who? I don't know yet. Palumi folded her arms. Okay, this is starting to sound like one of those crime dramas. I'm not joking. His voice was calm but firm. And neither are the people looking for you. Palumi searched his face carefully. For the first time since meeting him, she felt a small chill crawl up her spine. But why? She asked. I don't know. That's not very comforting. Minjae stepped closer. Did you translate any unusual documents at work recently? Palumi thought for a moment. I translate lots of documents. Anything confidential? She shrugged. My company deals with international clients. That's normal. Minjae's jaw tightened slightly. That might be the problem. Palumi sighed and rubbed her temple. So now I'm somehow involved in mafia business because I translate paperwork? Possibly. That's ridiculous. Minjae studied her face carefully. You really don't know anything. Palumi frowned. Know what? Exactly what they think you know. She shook her head slowly. I swear I don't. For a moment, the busy street noise faded between them. Cars passed.
People walked by.
But Minjae's focus remained entirely on her. Finally, he spoke again. If someone approaches you, I can handle myself. I'm sure you can. But the people looking for you are not the kind you argue with. Palumi sighed. You're really serious about this? Yes. And how exactly do you plan to stop them? Minjae's expression darkened slightly. They won't get the chance. Palumi tilted her head. That sounded very threatening. It was meant to. She studied him carefully. You barely know me. Minjae looked directly into her eyes. And yet here we are. Palumi's voice softened slightly. Why do you care? For a moment, Minjae didn't answer. The wind moved gently through the street. Finally, he spoke quietly. Because if anyone hurts you, his tone dropped colder than before. They'll disappear. Palumi felt her breath catch slightly. Not because she believed he was exaggerating, but because she knew he wasn't. After a moment, she forced a small smile. You're very dramatic, you know that? Minjae smirked faintly. And you're very calm for someone who just learned dangerous people might be looking for her. Palumi lifted her shoulders. I guess I'm getting used to danger. He stepped closer again. Don't what? Get used to it. Their eyes held for a moment. Then Palumi turned and began walking away. After a few steps, she glanced back. You know something? She said. What? You're either the most paranoid man I've ever met. He waited. Or the most protective. Minjae watched her carefully. And which one do you think I am? Palumi smiled slightly. I haven't decided yet. Then she disappeared into the crowd. Minjae stood quietly beside his car. One of his bodyguards approached. Boss, should we start investigating the people asking about her? Minjae's expression hardened. Yes. And if they find her first? Minjae's voice turned ice cold. They won't. The guard nodded immediately. Because everyone in Seoul knew one thing. When Minjae decided to protect someone, anyone who threatened that person usually didn't survive long enough to regret it. And somewhere in the city, people were already moving closer to Palumi Adebayo. The dangerous game had begun. For the next few days, Palumi tried to convince herself that Minjae had been exaggerating. Life continued normally. She went to work. She translated documents. She grabbed coffee from the same cafe. She even walked home through the same busy streets. Nothing unusual happened. No suspicious strangers. No mysterious questions. No danger. And yet, something still felt different. Late one evening, Palumi finally shut down her computer and stretched her arms. The office had grown quiet. Most of her coworkers had already gone home. The digital clock on the wall read 9:37 p.m. Palumi sighed. Another long day. She gathered her things and slipped her phone into her bag before walking toward the elevator. As the doors closed, she caught her reflection in the mirror. Her braids were slightly messy from a long day, and faint exhaustion showed under her eyes. You should work less, she muttered to herself. But something else crossed her mind. Minasio's voice. You shouldn't walk alone at night. Pulumi shook her head. I'm not letting that man scare me. The elevator doors opened. Outside, the night air felt cool and refreshing. The streets weren't completely empty, but they were far quieter than usual. A few cars passed slowly. Streetlights glowed softly along the sidewalk. Pulumi began walking toward the subway station. Her footsteps echoed lightly against the pavement. Everything felt normal. Almost too normal. Halfway down the block, Pulumi noticed headlights approaching from behind. A dark van rolled slowly along the street. She didn't think much of it at first, until the vehicle suddenly accelerated. The van screeched to a stop beside her. The side door slid open. 2 men jumped out. Pulumi's heart skipped. What the? One of the men grabbed her arm roughly. Get in. Pulumi reacted instantly. Hey, let go of me. She twisted her arm, trying to pull free. But the second man grabbed her shoulder. Don't make this difficult. Fear surged through her chest. Her mind raced. This is real. This is actually happening. She opened her mouth to scream. Then the sound of tires screeching echoed down the street. Several black cars sped toward them from the far end of the road. Headlights flooded the scene. The van driver shouted, "Move!" But it was already too late. The black cars stopped abruptly, blocking the street. Doors opened. Men in dark suits stepped out.
Fast. Precise. Armed.
Gunshots cracked through the air. Pulumi gasped as the men holding her immediately released their grip. The attackers scrambled back toward the van. Go. Go. One of them tried to run down the street. He didn't get far. Within seconds, he was pinned to the ground by 2 of Minasio's men. The rest of the attackers jumped into the van and sped away recklessly. The entire confrontation had lasted less than 30 seconds. The street fell silent again. Pulumi stood frozen in the middle of the road, her heart pounding loudly in her ears. Then one of the car doors opened. A familiar figure stepped out. Jang Minasio. His expression was calm, controlled, but his eyes were cold, very cold. He walked toward her slowly. The guard stepped aside respectfully as he approached. Pulumi blinked in disbelief. You? Minasio stopped in front of her. For a moment, he simply looked at her. Checking. Observing. Then his voice softened slightly. Are you hurt? Pulumi shook her head slowly. I don't think so. Minasio reached out gently and turned her arm slightly where the man had grabbed her earlier. His fingers were careful. Precise. Did they injure you?
No.
He studied her face closely. Pulumi realized something strange. Despite everything that had just happened, she felt calmer standing next to him. Minasio exhaled slowly. Relief flickered briefly across his face before disappearing. I warned you, he said quietly. Pulumi looked around the street, still stunned. You weren't kidding.
No.
She swallowed. Were you following me? Minasio didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked toward the captured attacker being held by his men. Who sent you? One guard demanded. The man refused to answer. Minasio's expression darkened. He turned back to Pulumi. Yes, he said calmly. I was following you. Pulumi stared at him. You've been watching me this whole time? I told you someone was looking for you. So, your solution was surveillance? My solution was protection. Pulumi opened her mouth to argue. But the memory of the man grabbing her arm flashed in her mind again. Her voice softened slightly. Thank you. Minasio nodded once. Then he turned to his men. Put him in the car. Yes, boss. The captured attacker struggled briefly before being forced into one of the black cars. Minasio looked back at Pulumi. This confirms it. What? They're serious about finding you. Pulumi rubbed her forehead. This is insane. Minasio stepped closer. You're safe now. For how long? Until I find out who sent them. Pulumi looked up at him. And if they come back? Minasio's voice dropped dangerously low. They won't. The confidence in his tone made Pulumi shiver slightly. Not out of fear, but because she believed him completely. She glanced at the line of black cars. So what happens now? Minjae opened the door of one of the vehicles. You're coming with me. Palumi blinked. Excuse me? You're not staying alone tonight. I can go home.
No. His voice was firm.
Why not? Because whoever sent those men now knows exactly where to find you. Palumi hesitated. Her logical side told her this was crazy. Getting into a car with a mafia boss? Trusting a man she had only known for days. But another part of her remembered something else. He had warned her. He had protected her. And he had arrived exactly when she needed help. Palumi sighed deeply. This situation is unbelievable. Minjae held the car door open patiently. Get in. She stared at him. You're very bossy. And you're very stubborn. Palumi crossed her arms. You're enjoying this, aren't you? Minjae smirked slightly. Not the attack. But the fact that I have to rely on you. His smile widened just a little. Palumi shook her head. You're impossible. Then she stepped into the car. Minjae closed the door behind her. As the black cars began moving through the quiet streets of Seoul, Palumi stared out the window at the passing lights. Her life had changed in less than 1 minute, and she had a feeling things were only going to get more complicated, because now she was officially under the protection of the most dangerous man in the city, Minjae, and whoever was hunting her had just made a very powerful enemy. The black cars moved silently through the glowing streets of Seoul. Inside the back seat, Palumi Adebayo sat quietly, her eyes fixed on the passing city lights outside the window. Her heart had finally slowed after the attack, but her mind was still racing. Everything had happened so fast. One moment she was walking home from work. The next, 2 strangers were trying to drag her into a van. She rubbed her arm where the man had grabbed her earlier. Across from her, Minjae noticed the movement immediately. Does it hurt? He asked. Palumi glanced up. A little. His jaw tightened slightly. They shouldn't have touched you. Palumi raised an eyebrow. Well, kidnapping usually involves touching people. Minjae didn't smile. Instead, he leaned forward and spoke quietly to the driver. Drive faster. Yes, boss. The car accelerated smoothly. Palumi studied him for a moment. You're really angry. I'm calm. You don't look calm. His voice remained controlled. I am calm because you're safe. That answer made Palumi pause. She looked out the window again. You arrived pretty quickly back there. Minjae didn't answer immediately. You were already watching the street, weren't you? She continued. Yes. For how long? Long enough. Palumi sighed. So basically, I've had a Mafia security team following me around for days? Correct. That's slightly terrifying. It kept you alive tonight. Palumi couldn't argue with that. The car slowed as they approached a massive building overlooking the Han River. Tall glass walls reflected the lights of the city, and private security guards stood outside the entrance. Palumi leaned forward slightly. Where are we? My home. Her eyes widened. You live here? Yes. That looks like a luxury hotel. Minjae smirked faintly. It's not. The car stopped. A guard opened the door immediately. Minjae stepped out first, then held his hand out toward Palumi. She stared at it for a moment, then took it. His grip was warm and steady as he helped her out of the car. They walked inside. The lobby was enormous. Marble floors, high ceilings, soft golden lights. Palumi looked around in disbelief. Okay, now this definitely looks like a luxury hotel. It's a private residence. For one person? Minjae shrugged slightly. I like space. They stepped into a private elevator that required a fingerprint scan. The doors closed quietly. As the elevator rose, silence filled the small space. Palumi crossed her arms. So, are you finally going to explain what's happening? Minjae leaned against the wall. Yes. Good. Because you're in more danger than you realize. Palumi rolled her eyes slightly. Great. That's comforting. The elevator stopped at the top floor. The doors opened to reveal a massive penthouse. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the entire city. Soft lighting illuminated elegant furniture and modern artwork. Palumi walked slowly into the room.
Wow.
Even she couldn't hide her amazement. This place is incredible. Minasio closed the door behind them. You'll stay here for now. Palumi turned quickly. Hold on. What? You're telling me I'm just moving into the Mafia boss's penthouse? Temporarily. That's still insane. Minasio walked toward the kitchen and poured 2 glasses of water. Sit. Palumi hesitated, then sat down on the large couch. Minasio handed her the glass and took the seat across from her. For the first time since the attack, his expression became serious. Completely serious. I did some investigating, he said.
About what?
Your company. Palumi frowned.
Why?
Because the people who attacked you aren't random criminals. She leaned forward. Then who are they? Minasio rested his elbows on his knees. They belong to an international network. Palumi blinked. What kind of network? Smuggling. Financial crimes. Weapons. Her stomach tightened. And that involves me, how? Minasio picked up a tablet from the table and pulled up a document. 2 weeks ago, your company translated a set of documents for a foreign client. Palumi nodded slowly. That happens all the time. These documents weren't ordinary. He turned the screen toward her. Palumi scanned the text. Shipping routes. Account numbers. Encrypted notes. Her eyes widened. Oh. Minasio nodded. Yes. They think I saw this. Exactly. Palumi leaned back against the couch. But I didn't even realize what it was. That doesn't matter to them. Why not? Because if you did read it, you could expose everything. Palumi covered her face with her hands briefly. This is unbelievable. Minasio's voice softened slightly. I know. She looked at him again. So now what? Now you stay here. Palumi groaned. I have a job. You can work remotely. I have an apartment. You won't be safe there. Palumi stared at him for a long moment. You're very controlling. I'm very practical. She shook her head. This whole situation sounds like the plot of a movie. Minasio smirked faintly. Life is rarely simple. Palumi thought quietly for a moment. Then she leaned back into the couch with a small smile. You know what?
What?
I think you just wanted an excuse to keep me here. Minasio leaned closer slightly. Maybe. Palumi pointed a finger at him. I knew it. His voice lowered playfully. I told you already. Palumi narrowed her eyes. Don't you dare repeat that line. Minasio chuckled softly. I want some sugar. Palumi groaned loudly. That line is still terrible. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper again. But it worked. Palumi rolled her eyes. You're unbelievable. Minasio leaned back again. But you're still here. Palumi paused. Then she smiled slightly. Only because your penthouse has amazing views. Of course. They sat quietly for a moment. The city lights stretched endlessly beyond the windows. For the first time that night, Palumi felt safe. And for the first time in years, Jang Minasio felt something unusual. Not responsibility, not control, but something much more dangerous. Interest. And maybe something even deeper. Because the woman sitting in his living room wasn't afraid of him. And that made her the most dangerous person in his world. 2 weeks passed inside Jang Minasio's penthouse. What began as a temporary arrangement slowly turned into something neither of them expected. Palumi Adebayo had adjusted surprisingly well to life under the roof of the most feared man in Seoul. At first, she kept her distance. She worked from her laptop near the massive windows overlooking the city, translating documents for her company while trying to pretend that armed security guards downstairs were completely normal. But gradually things changed. Minasio would bring her coffee in the mornings. Sometimes they argued over small things, like whether she should still go outside alone. Other times they simply sat in silence, watching the city lights flicker on at night. Despite his reputation, Minasio never treated her like a prisoner. If anything, he treated her like someone important. Someone he respected. And Palumi noticed. One evening, Palumi stood in the penthouse kitchen preparing tea. She had discovered that Minjae rarely cooked, which meant she had unofficially taken over the kitchen. "Your fridge is embarrassing," she said loudly. Minjae looked up from his tablet at the dining table. "What's wrong with it? You have bottled water, expensive wine, and absolutely nothing else." "I don't cook." "I noticed." She poured hot water into 2 cups. "You can't survive on wine and takeout forever." Minjae smirked. "I've been doing it for years." Palumi carried the cups to the table. "Well, not anymore." She slid 1 cup toward him. Minjae looked down at it. "Tea. Relax. It won't kill you." He picked it up and took a small sip. Then he nodded once. "It's good." Palumi smiled proudly. "Of course it is." They sat quietly for a moment. Outside, the city of Seoul glittered beneath the night sky. Then Minjae's phone vibrated on the table. He glanced at the screen. His expression changed immediately. The relaxed atmosphere vanished. Palumi noticed. "What happened?" Minjae stood up slowly. "My men found them." Palumi's stomach tightened. "The people who attacked me?" "Yes." "Who are they?" Minjae slipped on his suit jacket. "International smugglers." "And they're still looking for me?" "Not anymore." Palumi watched him carefully. "You're going after them?" "Yes." She stood up too. "That sounds dangerous." Minjae looked at her calmly. "It is." "Then maybe you shouldn't go." For a moment, silence filled the room. Minjae studied her expression. "You're worried about me." Palumi crossed her arms. "I'm worried about unnecessary violence." He smiled faintly. "That's not what your face says." Palumi looked away. "Just be careful." Minjae walked closer. "Stay here tonight." "I wasn't planning to go anywhere."
Good.
He stopped in front of her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Minjae reached out and gently touched her chin, lifting her gaze slightly. His voice softened. "When I come back, we should talk." "About what?" "About what happens next." Palumi raised an eyebrow. "That sounds mysterious." He smiled slightly. "Everything about me is mysterious." She rolled her eyes. "True." Minjae turned and walked toward the door. Before leaving, he paused. "Lock the door behind me." Palumi nodded. "Okay." The door closed, and suddenly the penthouse felt very quiet. Hours passed. Palumi tried to focus on work, but her attention kept drifting to the clock. Midnight. 1 a.m. 2:15 a.m. Finally, the elevator doors opened. Palumi stood up quickly. Minjae walked into the penthouse. His suit jacket was gone, and his sleeves were rolled slightly. But he looked completely calm. "You're back." "Yes." Palumi studied him carefully. "Is it over?" "Yes." "And they won't bother you again." Palumi exhaled in relief. "Good." Minjae walked toward the window overlooking the city. Palumi followed him. Seoul stretched beneath them like a sea of lights. For a moment they simply stood there together. Then Minjae spoke quietly. "You could leave now." Palumi blinked. "What?" "The people chasing you are gone. So, you're free to go back to your apartment." Palumi looked at him. "And if I don't want to?" Minjae turned toward her slowly. "Then stay." Palumi tilted her head. "That's it. You want a longer speech?" "Maybe." Minjae stepped closer. The city lights reflected softly in his dark eyes. "If you stay," he paused, "then things will change." Palumi raised an eyebrow.
How?
His voice lowered. "People in this city know who I am." "Yes, the terrifying Mafia boss." "Exactly." He stepped closer again. "If you stand beside me." Palumi finished the sentence quietly. "They'll see me too." "Yes." Silence stretched between them. Then Palumi smiled slightly. "You know something?" "What?" "You're very dramatic." Minjae chuckled softly. "And you're not afraid." Palumi leaned against the window.
No. Why?
She looked up at him. "Because the most dangerous man in Seoul has been protecting me for 2 weeks." Minjae's lips curved into a rare smile. Then, he stepped close enough to gently take her hand. His voice dropped to the same quiet whisper from the night they first met. The most dangerous man in Seoul. He paused. Finally met the only woman who wasn't afraid of him. Pulumi squeezed his hand lightly. Good. Why? She smirked. Because someone has to keep the mafia boss humble. For the first time in years, Jang Min-seo laughed without restraint. The powerful man who ruled Seoul's underworld had just met the only woman capable of challenging him and standing beside him, not as a victim, not as someone he protected, but as his equal, his partner, his queen. High above the glowing city lights, a new story was beginning. The story of Pulumi Adebayo and Jang Min-seo. And everyone in Seoul would soon learn one thing. The Mafia king was no longer alone. Because now,